Guys, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, you are welcome to our last session for the series of the seminar that we've been doing. I request you that we observe silence. And then today again, we're going to ask Mr. Karamagi to help us with monitoring, muting those who are making noise. So today we're going to cover on issues on data, especially sources, types, and instruments of data collection, some research ethics that you need to observe. And then at the end, we shall cover some software application. I thought I should give you this as a bonus, some software application in SPSS, because I've seen that most people are using SPSS now. How we can use SPSS together with process macro, which is essentially used for mediation. So we shall try some examples of mediations, various models of mediations, and then moderation, and then moderated mediation, and some conditional processes. This will help us to consolidate our knowledge of what we've been doing. So let me start by sharing my screens so that we start. So we're going to start with data first. Okay. I think I need to start with research ethics. Now, in any discipline, there are ethics. Now, research ethics simply refers to questions of right and wrong. What is right? What is wrong in research? So when researchers think about ethics, they are considering whether it is right to conduct a particular study or whether it is appropriate to carry out certain procedures. Now, there are certain guidelines which are universally accepted for research ethics. Mainly, there are about 4 or 5 pillars of this. So the first one is informed consent, which means that whenever you are collecting data, whether it is secondary data, whether it is primary data, you need your sources and your participants to give you their consent in taking part in that research, either by offering data or by filling your questionnaire or your supplying your information, okay? And then you should not fail to mention any information that might influence whether consent would be granted, okay? But also participants should not be forced or deceived unless there are special mitigation circumstances in your design. Then the second thing is the right to withdraw. That means research participants should have the right to withdraw from the research process at any stage because it's not a legal contract if they agree to fill your questionnaire. And actually, you as a researcher, you are expected to maintain professionalism and calmness in whichever situation that you'll be facing. You should not pressurize your participants. Otherwise, you might distort data that would create some possibilities of collecting wrong information. So data associated with that participant should be destroyed if he decides to withdraw, okay? And they should not be part of the analysis. Number 3 is privacy and confidentiality. You need to maintain that, special respects as far as possible. You have to, well, in most cases, you may also ensure privacy and confidentiality by mentioning in the instruments, for example, or by verbally assuring that the information that you're collecting, whether it be secondary data or primary data, they will be only used in aggregate form for research purposes and not for purpose of identifying individuals' identities, okay? Of course, in qualitative research, it is common to use pseudonyms or alternative place names to protect participants' anonymity, because in qualitative research, you'll be dealing with a specific narrow samples. Okay, you're collecting in-depth information from fewer people. So some people may feel like you're interrogating them. So, so you have to preserve some anonymity using some pseudonyms, etc., etc. And then number 4, you have to minimize the risk of harm. Researchers must not cause any physical or psychological harm to participants because some topics are very sensitive. Maybe you're dealing with some behavioral subjects and you're collecting data from these people, maybe people who have been affected with some diseases. So you have to be aware of that. You have to pay attention to feelings of people. So you have to make sure that you leave the participant in the same state as you encountered them. That's very difficult to achieve, but that's what you're supposed to do. So that includes minimizing risk of harm to yourself. So a researcher should avoid dangerous situation as much as possible. Okay. So these are some useful links which you can also visit. Some of which, of course, are talking. These are Google. You can find them from Google Drive. But anyway, just copy these links and paste them in your browser. You should be able to access some information on questionnaire design, for example, on ethics, etc., etc. Now, next we need to move to methods and tools of data collection. Okay, methods. Hoping you can see my slides. Do you see my slides? Yes. Can you see my slides?
Yes, doctor. Yeah,
yes, yes, it can be clear.
All right. Methods and tools of data collection. We are going to cover briefly in this one, these sets of slides, those kind of stuff, concepts of data collection, data source, methods and techniques for both qualitative and quantitative, tools for data collection, types, characteristics, and development, the issues of validity and reliability of tools as well. So we'll have discussions on those issues, Okay. Now, data is simply a piece of information about a phenomenon under study. The aim is to collect data, summarize it, then transform that data into meaningful information in order to identify and measure variables, and probably to assess relationships, etc. So the data collection procedure need to be clear, unbiased, reliable, and valid. This will ensure that you have reliable results. So the idea of reliability and validity of your findings will start with, it actually starts from theorizing. And if your theorizing goes right, and then your methodologies, and then of course the instruments. Now, of course, the instrument will ensure that you're collecting reliable and valid data, which is not biased. Okay? Now, there are what we call is the 5 W's of data collection. Now, these are what data is to be collected, from whom data is to be collected, who will collect data, from where the data will be collected, and when is the data collected. Now, these 5 W's are important. Okay. Then there are what we call is data collection methods. Of course, I don't expect to, I think it's just clear. We don't need to discuss a lot about the 5 W's because these are obvious, but you need to know that they're there. So when you're writing your proposal, maybe I should note that when you're writing your proposal or your article, your paper, you, in the methodology there, you really need to explain what kind of data are you collecting? Is it secondary? Is it primary? And if it is primary, is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? All these kind of stuff. And whether if it is quantitative, then is it a panel data? Is it time series data, or is it a survey data? You see, is it categorical? Is it binary? So in most cases, you would probably need to prepare a table and summarize those information about the characteristics of your data, etc. Then from whom, that would actually point to the population from which you're going to sample. Then of course, when you're collecting data, do you have research assistants? Are you training them? Etc. All that will ensure a lot of reliability and consistency in your data collection. Now, the more you report this information in your proposal and your article, or even in your consultancy, because we might even be needing to do some consultancy, maybe with a reputable organization, you need to indicate all that kind of information and be as much as possible, as explicitly as much as possible. That's very important. Then from where the data will be collected, that will have to do with areas and sources, if there are specific institutions from which you are collecting. If it's secondary data, maybe you're collecting from some specific websites. What is the reputation of that website and all this kind of stuff? Then when is the data collected? See, because you might be doing research today, but your data covers 5 years from now backward, or even maybe you're dealing with data of last year or 5 years back. That's what you're studying. There are many possibilities. So now, data collection methods here. Essentially, we have primary data collection methods and secondary data collection methods. And of course, we shall later discuss the sources of primary data and the sources of secondary data, so that you may weigh the possibilities for your research and your publication, or even your consultancy. Okay. Now, primary data collection methods, these simply involve data collection directly from the subjects by the researcher or trained data collector. These are the purpose of, these will be, for example, surveys, interviews, observations, questionnaires, etc. But secondary data collection involves the use of data that were collected for various purposes other than current research. And therefore, you are approaching these data sources so that you may find a way of using them in your research. Now, that is very common in finance, economics, and many other disciplines, okay? Even medicine, and even education. See, you have data collected for different purposes, then you adopt it for a different purpose. Okay, so that would come from things like diaries, notes, care plans, maybe medication records, statistical abstracts, census reports, financial reports as well, etc., etc. Now, let's talk about primary data. It's normally, in terms of advantage, it is tailored according to research needs. So the researcher can determine exactly what data will be collected. It is well-defined and consistent in terms of its protocol. Completeness of data is also ensured. In terms of disadvantage, it is time-consuming, it is costly, it relies on subjects' recall and communication abilities. Bias may occur due to various factors, of course, like, for example, the knowledge of the research assistants, or maybe there could be many other issues. Okay. The secondary data, it is easier and quicker. Sometimes it's cheaper in a sense that it is free, especially if you approach sources that are free. But there are other companies that are selling data, so that might also be difficult. There is the absence of researchers' bias because they are collected. This type of data is collected by a third party, a person who collected the data for a different purpose. Let's say, for example, financial records, or even marketing records, etc. Sales record, they are collected for a different purpose by a different person. Now you as a researcher, you are using it for research purpose. Now that is an advantage because it creates some independence. The researcher's biases are not contained. Disadvantage, there are issues of accuracy, completeness. Sometimes the data might be missing, but also reliability depends on the original individual collecting the data, and of course the reputation of the institutions that is maintaining this data. So, for example, if you're using data from BOT, Bank of Tanzania, you'll have to depend on the reputation of the bank, of the central bank, okay? Etc. So, or if you're using data from universities, maybe students' scores, then you have to rely on reputations of universities, etc. Now, that's that. And then there are what we call as tools and methods of data collection. Now, a tool, you have to distinguish, and all these need to be reported, by the way, in your methodology. Now, a tool is simply a device or an instrument used by a researcher to collect data to measure the concept of interest. Okay, that's a tool. The methods, these are various steps or strategies used for gathering data, analyzing data, and research. Okay, so I'm not talking about research method because here I'm talking about data collection methods and data collection tools. Okay, that's the idea. Now, types of data collection methods, you have self-reports, things like, for example, interviews and their types, structured questionnaires, for example, observational methods, biophysiological measurements, psychometric measurements, and other projective techniques. Okay, I'll discuss these in detail. Okay, so these were data collection methods. Okay? Self-reports, observational methods. And then you have, of course, the first and the second are the commonest, but the third are the commonest probably in social sciences. Okay? But then you have these others like biophysiologic measurements, psychometric measurements, and other projective techniques, which we shall just go through quickly in passing, because that's not our focus, but mainly, so these are methods. Then these are tools. Tools will be things like self-report, in which case you're talking of a questionnaire, attitudinal scales, semantic differential scale, visual analog scale. We'll discuss this, and then observation with their examples there. Rating scale, checklist, anecdotal record, process recording, video tapes, etc. These are tools, especially, for example, particularly in maybe qualitative research, you might record things and then come and transcribe information. So checklists, anecdotal records, ratings. Then you have biophysiological, like in vitro and in vivo tools. These are there also. I hope you see the distinction, and you have to explain which one you are using or you use in your research and in your article. That creates a lot of credibility, and those reviewers or discussants, when they read your work, they know that this guy knows what he's doing, and therefore you are creating a lot of credibility in your work, which is good, see? Now let's start discussing tools for data collections, okay? One by one. Now let's start with self-reports. There are several, but these ones are the self-reports. But before we start, let's go through what we mean by self-reports. Now, it is a method in which information is gathered by questioning people, okay? Why is it called self-report? Because the participant or respondent is giving a self-report, okay, about what he knows or about himself, see? So it's a self-report. So saying it's a method in which information is gathered by questioning people, by questioning good amount of information to be gathered. So self-reports could be, for example, done through interview methods or self-administered questionnaire, that is SAQ, or paper and pencil test, that is also possible. Okay, now these are lists of some of those examples of self-reports in qualitative self-reports and the quantitative self-reports. So there are some people who have claimed when they see interview, they think it's only for qualitative research, but actually interviews could also be done for quantitative research. So it all depends. Therefore, qualitative would involve things like unstructured interviews, while in quantitative you have structured interviews, okay? Let me pick a pointer here. Now, semi-structured interviews, then you have focus group interviews, joint interviews, life histories, oral histories, critical incidents, diaries and journals, etc., etc. Then in quantitative, you have structured interview, questioning or closed-ended questionnaire, or rather, of course, when you say questioning, that's a generic way of saying self-report, because when you say questionnaire, you're mentioning a tool. Okay, so the I mean, you're mentioning a specific tool. Okay? But there are several types of questioning, which we'll discuss. Then you have scales, Q sorts, and vignettes. All right. So let's start one by one. Qualitative self-reports, interviews. Now, in here, we are discussing within the realm of qualitative self-reports. These are the tools. Interview. This one involves verbal communication between the researcher and subject, expecting that the interviewee will provide information. So it's more of a conversation with the definite purpose of obtaining certain information by means of spoken word. Okay. So most common, it's a most common method in qualitative studies. Okay. In descriptive studies and quantitative studies. So investigator collects data directly from the participants by having face-to-face contact to obtain factual data about opinion, attitudes, etc. All right, these are some benefits, of course. These will help you in choosing which one you should use. See, there's high response rate. You can collect data from illiterate people or subjects. There's clarity, etc., etc. You can use special devices, for example, to record. You can check accuracy through replay. It's flexible and adaptable. So interview, so you even have time to clarify what you mean by what you're asking. Okay, see, so there's a lot of advantage with this. There are types. You have unstructured interview, which is non-directive or non-standardized. Then you have semi-structured, which is focused interview. Then you have a completely structured interview. Now, on each of these, the unstructured interview is characterized by flexibility of approach to questioning. Okay. Subjects are encouraged to talk freely, and only very few questions asked to direct the trend of the interview. It is also it's sometimes called a grand tour technique. Okay. So it is unstructured, and therefore there are flexibility. Here you have some advantages and disadvantages. I will not go through this, but I'll just read the first one. Information obtained in such a causal manner enhances the reliability and credibility of data. Therefore, that's one big advantage, especially when you are writing your proposal, when you are justifying why you are using a certain tool or instrument. You can say these advantages by saying that interview increases reliability and credibility of data, etc. In terms of disadvantages, the interviewer requires a great deal of knowledge and skills in order to analyze the data. Why? Because in most cases, when you're dealing with qualitative data, qualitative research, the process of data collection, data analysis, and data, it's almost concurrently. It's done in situ. As you are interviewing, you are also analyzing, because you're interviewing, you're analyzing, you're writing. So it's a concurrent process, unlike in quantitative studies. Now, semi-structured is used when researchers have a list of topics or broad questions. See, that must be addressed in an interview. Therefore, you have a set of questions or list of topics, okay? And then you assure the participants to talk freely about the topic. And then you as the researcher, you ask questions to different ways, and to different participants. Different ways to different participants. That means it's not necessary that the question that you're asking participant A, you're going to also ask participant B. See, it includes both closed-ended and open-ended questionnaires. So, for example, maybe you're dealing with some research in which somebody needs to state his tribe. So you say, what is your tribe? Probably they say, this tribe. So that is closed-ended. Then can you explain why your tribe has been successful, probably in a business? Maybe you're studying those kind of stuff, qualitative. Now that is open-ended, okay? Some advantage and disadvantage there, okay? Then you have the structured interview. This involves asking the same question in the same order and in the same manner of all respondents in a study. See? So the idea of saying this is unstructured and this is structured is not actually, it's not based on the kind of the question mostly, but it is based on how you are implementing the instruments. I hope you understand, because this is structured interview, but it is in qualitative research, you see? But some people are confusing, are saying, oh, structured interview is for quantitative research. You watch out, you see? It's all about the way in which you are implementing it. That's what matters, which distinguishes it from being structured or unstructured or semi-structured for that matter. See, so you say structured because you are saying that the same sets of questions, whether they are closed-ended or open-ended, you are administering them to each subject, your correspondent, you have to meet. Okay, that's structured. But semi-structured is a bit different, as you can see here. They talk freely about the topic, but also the topic is broad. But then, of course, it includes both closed-ended and, of course, that's there. So that's the difference there. Then you have I'm just going back so that you see the other one, which was what. I'm sorry, I was actually looking for. Okay, you have unstructured, semi-structured, and completely structured, which is structured interview. So I was looking for this one. Structured, unstructured interview. It's a flexible approach to questioning. So it's not about the kind of the questions, but it's about the way you implement it. So that's why they say it may be called a grand tour. It's sort of a discovery method through which you are exploring, all right? And I'll show you the suitability of these methods in different situations, okay? So that's the distinction. Now, the other one, the second one is focus group interviews. In these interviews, you have a homogeneous group of 5 to 10. Now, remember, it's homogeneous, whose opinions and experience are solicited simultaneously. See? Simultaneously, not serially, which means these people are in one setting. You have organized that setting. You as the interviewer or researcher, you have these 5 to 10 people. It could be in a conference room or something, or in a place of your choice. Then you guide the discussion according to written sets of questions or topics. Okay. Why is it called focus? It's because you have sets of questions and topics on which you are focusing. It's a group because you have several people being interviewed concurrently. All right. So it's a planned discussion. During duration of the interview may range from 1 to 1.5 to 2 hours. Okay. And all the verbal and non-verbal information are recorded, of course. Of course, you tell them that you're recording them. You ask their consent, because to create some confidence in them, of course. And you give them ample time to express their views. So of course, interviews are good, especially if you are, focus group interviews are good, especially if you are actually dealing with a new topic, which needs a lot of exploration. Some advantages here: it's efficient, can generate a lot of information from these. Normally, it's from experts or from some people with knowledge on that subject. Okay, some disadvantages: chances of clients or researchers' bias. Okay, that's possible because the researcher is there. So some people may be afraid to disclose some information because you're there, see? So that is also possible. Then you have joint interviews. Now, they are conducted simultaneously to undertake the phenomena involving 2 or more parties. So people that are interviewed are intimately related. So for example, when you're dealing with AIDS patients and their caretakers, okay? So you have the patient and the caretaker. That's why it's called joint interview, etc. That can be done in many other situations, even in business settings. Okay? It all depends with your research question and what you're doing. Or even in education. Maybe you're dealing with a teacher and student, okay? Or maybe you're dealing with the manager and his employee. See, so those are, you have the merits there, you have the demerits there, okay? They are helpful, especially when you're observing dynamics between 2 key actors, okay? So for example, you have, maybe you are studying corporate governance, and you know the heat that is there between management and board members, okay, probably the chairman, etc. Or maybe the internal audit unit with the management, see? So you want to see the dynamics between the 2 key actors, etc. Okay, so that might be used only to supplement information, okay? May be uncomfortable to participants because that it might seem that these people are telling on each other, so which might not be very good, probably, depending on what the circumstance will turn out to be, okay? Then you have life histories, their narrative, self-disclosure about individual experiences. So for example, a study involving experiences of women who are simultaneously experienced abuse and physical disability, see? That is possible within education, within psychology, social work, human resource, especially when we're dealing with motivation and all this kind of stuff, okay? So you have to be aware of all these issues and know and take advantage of these tools which you can use to collect your data. You have the so-called critical incidents. In here, you gather information about people's behavior by examining specific incidents relating to the behavior under investigation. So the word critical here, you mean that the incident must have a positive or negative impact on some outcome. And therefore you want him to discuss that incident, you see? So an example, a study involving the outcomes of stress management program. So the 5-week program taught, maybe for example, mind, body, spiritual techniques of silently repeating a mantra with spiritual meaning, etc., etc. Now, at the end of the day, you are able to collect information from such situations. But also in business, maybe you're dealing with the strikes, boycott, employee strikes. Now, that's a critical incident, from which you want people to relate, okay? And give some information or maybe some redundancy, because that's a critical incident, which might have caused some negative impact in their life or some positive effect in their life, whether financial, social, economic, etc. See, diaries and journals. These are personal diaries and journals that provide an intimate and detailed description of person's everyday life. They can be unstructured or semi-structured. Now, what we mean really is you provide information about how people prevent illness, for example, maintain health, experience morbidity, and treat health problems, okay? They can be used for people with literacy skills, and also they depend on the participation and cooperation of the participants. Okay. So for example, older adults with chronic health problems can be asked to maintain a diary. These are journals or like logs over maybe 2 weeks period for 15 minutes per day to explore various strategies used by them to manage health problems, for example. So out of that would be the data that you're collecting. Then you have photo elicitation interviews. It involves an interview simulated and guided by photographic images. Okay, so photographs of the participants are taken up by the researcher themselves or by the participants and become a stimulus for discussion. Okay. I'll not discuss very much about this, but if you want to explore more, there are a lot of material on these type of methods, depending on what you're studying. Now, quantitative self-reports. First, we have questioning. This method allows the researcher to gather information by asking the questions orally or by means of a formal written document called a questionnaire. So in questioning, you have two possibilities. It could be through interview, that's oral, or it could be through a questionnaire, which is through written form, okay? So a questionnaire, which is normally a written form, that's just a structured instrument with a series of questions prepared by the researcher. And they are actually trying to ask questions to complete either by pencil, by computer, anyways. That's a question which you all know. But then it's called structured administered questionnaire. When they are completed, they are normally called survey. Okay. When the structured administered questionnaire are completed, they are normally called survey, okay? Now, methods of administering these are several. One is direct administration, where you go physically. And then the second one is by post or email. or electronic means. It could be mailed questionnaire. Now with mail questionnaire, there are also softwares which you can use to design your questionnaire and mail them, or you can even just design your questionnaire and use mass mailing programs to mail to many people, etc. So there are many options out of this which you can take advantage of. Okay, some of our PhD student actually was using some of this software to collect data, which they can even locate the location of, and they are free. The best thing out of this is that they're free. They can even locate the location of the participants, so you can fill the questionnaire by a smartphone. And out of that, you can collect that information easily on common topics and specific research questions, which you can use to analysis.
Sorry, sir. About questioning, we have seen it is falling under quantitative method. Why can't it fall also on qualitative aspect?
Well, because in qualitative, it's more of participatory in a sense that it's sort of a dialogue, okay? But in quantitative, you want to obtain some structured information, so which means there is the flexibility is not there. And therefore, it's like you are interrogating these people to give you structured information. It's either they have that information you're looking for or they don't have. But in qualitative, you are interviewing and you're giving them some freedom to give what you want and to give you even more than what you did not even expect it, which is provided that it is related to what you're studying, because you're trying to explore, so that later you may be able to establish probably themes or something. But anyway, reserve questions to the end. So that's that. So you have open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. Now, open-ended questions, in this one, it's a bit providing respondents opportunity to express opinions and answers in their own way, although not necessarily giving them the freedom to give you new information. The idea here is, to give you different information on the subject matter. The idea here is to allow them to give you information, which is information, but which they could express in their own way. Okay, I hope it's clear. I'm trying to distinguish open-ended questioning or questions or questionnaires from interview, for example, in qualitative research. Okay. So, for example, what did you do when you discovered you had AIDS? Maybe you're studying about HIV/AIDS. So people will have to express in their own way about what experience they went through. Then you have closed-ended questions or fixed alternative questions. Response alternatives are pre-specified by the researcher. Okay, because it's easy for statistical analysis. You can implement the instrument at different intervals to different peoples, etc. Now here, that's where you have now something very important, which you really need to pay attention, because most of you are doing closed-ended questions or questionnaire. Now, there are types of closed-ended questions you have to be aware of. You have the dichotomous questions. And by the way, when you are preparing your instruments, when you are explaining your instrument, you also have to explain the type of question that you'll be asking, and their possible features. So you have the dichotomous questions, which actually I will discuss them here later, but here I'm just mentioning them. Then you have multiple choice questions, cafeteria questions, rank order questions, contingence questions, etc., etc. And then number 7, the most popular Likert questions. But you also have rating questions, then matrix questions, etc. Now, the dichotomous questions require response to make choice between two alternatives, such as yes or no, male or female, white or black, etc., etc. So it's dichotomous in a sense that it is either of the one. So you only have two options. Then number 2, you have multiple choice questions. You make a choice between 2 or more than 2 response alternatives, okay? So that's, so for example here, you have, for example, 3 options or more. And then you have 2 or more, you have 2 or more than 2 response alternatives. You see, which means that, let's say, for example, you are listing several options, but you are allowing them to choose 2 or more out of the same question. See, let's say, for example, you are saying you are mentioning skills, various skills that a respondent, you want to know if they have that kind of skill. Let's say, for example, you're mentioning accounting skill, maybe entrepreneurial skills, maybe business skills, etc., etc., etc. So if somebody has multiple of these skills, then he's able to pick more than one out of those. See, that's the idea there. Okay, then you have cafeteria questions. Here you select a best response, okay? That most closely correspond to their views. Okay, so for example, what do you think about hormone replacement therapy? Okay, so you have A, B, C, D. Now these questions, these options, like it is dangerous, should be avoided, one should be cautious, etc., etc. Now here, you want them to pick the best response, which means all of these questions are possible answers, but what is the best response? See, that's the idea there. Rank order questions, here the respondents is required to rank responses from most favorable to least favorable, okay? Therefore, so let's say, for example, what according to you is most important for your life? Money, education, family, health, etc. So you have to rank by saying, let's say, for example, here, let's say, maybe this is 1, this is 2. So you're ranking. Okay, maybe this is 3, this is 4. That's the idea there, okay? Okay. Then we have contingent questions. The next question is asked if a respondent gives a particular response to previous question only. Okay, so you go like you say, are you stressed? You have to say no or yes, and then if you say yes, you say if yes, what are the reasons? Okay, like say, do you own a small business? You say yes, and then some more explanations are needed. Now that is called contingent questions. Then you have rating questions. In here, the respondent is required to judge something along an ordered dimension. You rate a particular issue on a scale that ranges from, let's say, poor to good. And then you are given choices. So for example, how do you rank a quality of education in Tanzania? Are you gonna say good, fair, poor, very poor? You see, as you can note here, this is not based on the idea of, let's say, that it's not based on the Likert scale here. Don't confuse this with the Likert scale, because this is, you have poor, you have very poor, poor, fair, good. You see? You could even have a longer scale, let's say 1 to 7, but you give them what you mean by those. Or just you give them a scale of 1 to 9. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then you tell them that 1 is the highest and 9 is the lowest. Okay? And therefore you're asking them to rate their satisfaction level, maybe on a banking service, maybe mobile banking, maybe of a, in Tanzania, the way mobile banks are operating. So people will simply look at that and say, okay, 1 is highest, which means maybe most satisfying, and then 9 least satisfying. So somebody may pick anything in between, 1 or 2, 3, or anything, but he knows his extremes, that is 1 and 9. So that would be the idea there, okay. Then you have the classical Likert scales or Likert questions. This one helps to know how strongly the respondent agree with a particular statement. So in this case, we assess the feelings of the respondents towards certain issue. So this community is a good place to raise children, strongly agree, etc., etc. So here you are simply, you want to rate their level of or their feelings towards certain issues. Okay. Then you have matrix questions. They have multiple questions and identical response categories, forming a matrix, for example. So for example, please let me know your weekly schedule of the following. So you have, for example, gym, aerobics, eating out, drinking, etc. So maybe you're studying something. And then here you have days. So somebody will have to rate when he go, does he do gym every day? Maybe it's just Monday to Friday. Saturday, Sunday is not doing. Aerobics, only Saturday, maybe eating, etc. So that can be done in any discipline. All right, any discipline, okay. So all these are types of questions, okay? That's a matrix question. Now, scales. Scale is a device designed to assign a numerical score to people, to place them on a continuum with respect to attributes being measured. Now, this is very important because most people do not understand how to use scales properly. So we use scale to measure subjective variables objectively. Okay. So, for example, here we have types of scales. We have Likert scale, then you have semantic differential scale, then you have visual analog scale. Okay. Now, Likert scale is popular. It consists of several declarative items that expresses a viewpoint on a topic. The respondents are simply asked to indicate the degree of which they agree or disagree, etc. They usually contain 5 categories, okay? That is 1 to 5, but 3 to 7 may also be used. It's also possible. For example, you can say, let's say, for example, 3, you simply say agree, disagree, neutral, okay? I mean, disagree, okay, disagree, neutral, agree, etc. Or maybe for this 7 scale, you can even subcategorize the other, because in Likert, the 5 Likert scale have 5. So you have, for example, strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. But you can further subcategorize the agree and disagree into respectively 2 more options. Like, for example, you say, okay, strongly disagree, fairly agree, fairly disagree, and then disagree, and then neutral, and then agree, and then, I mean, neutral, then agree, then fair, I mean, somewhat agree, and then strongly disagree, etc. So you have 7 there. So they are developed used item analysis approach, okay? This is a classical example. How do you personally evaluate the importance of the following aspects of coordinated coordinated care? You're assessing importance. So you have very important, important, so, less important, not important. That kind of a scale, okay? And then here you have all these constructs. Okay, Likert scales uses. They are normally used to measure attitude, value, feelings, people, about specific concepts such as situations, place, people, etc. Quantified measurements of qualitative attributes, okay? I mean, the attributes from qualitative studies, which can be quantified and put in Likert scale. I hope you understand. Which can be descriptively analyzed, but also to assess opinions of respondents about particular abstract concepts. These are some advantages, as you all know. Then, of course, you have the semantic differential scale. Now, this one consists of 2 opposite adjectives with a 7-pointer scale between them. In which case, the respondent is asked to rate a given concept by selecting 1 point on the scale that best describes his or her point of view. So the adjectives that are commonly used are, like, for example, effective, ineffective, good or bad, important and important, okay? So in this case, you're asked to rate a concept by selecting 1 point on the scale that best describes his or her point of view, okay? So that's the idea, okay? This is an example. You have, for example, nurse, maybe you're dealing with nurse practitioners, and you want to rate their level of competence. I mean, various attributes, competent, incompetent. And then worthless, valuable, pleasant, unpleasant. And therefore, in between here, you should be able to semantically differentiate this individual based on this extreme and this extreme by picking the number that correspond to that. I mean, to what you think is close to that. Now, uses of these type of scale. Maybe you want to measure patient satisfaction. Maybe you're dealing with patients okay, and you want to rate satisfaction, customer satisfaction. That would be maybe in medical studies. This would be, well, even in human resources, that is possible. This can be done in marketing, customer satisfaction survey, employee survey. Maybe you're dealing with motivation. So instead of just cramming the Likert scale, you can go for this. This is more informative, okay? Operational research, personality measurement for those who are doing human resource management, and in clinical psychology. Some advantage and disadvantage there. To construct difficulty, select relevant concepts appropriate for a given study, okay? Messia, we are sorry to hear you. Okay, so those are some of those advantage and disadvantage. Okay? But maybe I should mention number 3, advantage useful in evaluating several concepts such as person, situation, abstract ideas, and the controversial issues. All right, then you have visual analog scale. In here, you use this to measure the intensity of a certain sensation, feelings such as pain, discomfort, anxiety, alertness, etc., etc. This is a 100 millimeter horizontal vertical line with a statement at either end representing one extreme of the dimension being measured. Okay, so it requires subjects to respond for particular phenomenon measured, which is later measured by using a ruler from left end. All right, so you're measuring intensity of certain sensations and feelings, such as, for example, pain, discomfort, anxiety. For example, maybe you're dealing with anxiety, alertness, functionability, attitudes towards environmental conditions, etc. All right, that would be the example there. No pain versus worse pain, and then you have the in-between, okay? All right, then those are advantages and disadvantages there. Then you have Vignet. This one to elicit perceptions, opinions, beliefs, etc., etc. Then this is an example. So anyway, by the way, what it means is that you provide face-to-face contact with the respondents and explore the topic in depth, okay? In which case, you have a scenario or a situation, all right? And then you want these people to refer to that situation and explain as much as is possible. Now, that is what you call as, it could be written, it could be oral, either way, okay? And this is an example. Okay, then you have observation. This is used in collecting all the data or acquiring information through occurrences that can be observed through senses, with or without mechanical devices. Therefore, remember this is used in quantitative, it can be used in quantitative studies. So you use this to understand an ongoing process of situation, gather data on individual behavior or interactions between people, know about physical settings. And it's